Introduction. At the age of 10, I was struggling to read. My parents sent me to a reading teacher hoping it might help. I was labeled slow, at least compared to my two brothers who seemed to have an easier time of it. I was never diagnosed with dyslexia, but I've always found it hard to sit and read. That's still the case today. I feel an internal restlessness that never seems to relax. As a kid, I would bump my head against my pillow at night so that I could wear myself out to go to sleep. This translated into struggles with my studies. I found it virtually impossible to memorize anything. I needed to understand things on a very fundamental level. Formulas were challenging for me because I could never simply suspend my need to understand and accept things without an explanation. Because of this, I asked a lot of questions. So many that I'd often become annoying to my teachers. High school algebra was almost impossible. In response to my questions, the teacher once replied, "It's simply that way. Memorize it. Don't try to figure it out." This incessant need to figure things out at the most root level has meant that I spent hours breaking things down into their most basic elements. Like a ball of tangled string, I learned how to slowly pull at each string until the ball eventually freed itself. Some of my greatest challenges and joys in my life have come from taking something that appeared to be abstract from the outside and giving it a sense of clarity, making something that feels virtually impossible to see outside of abstraction concrete. For instance, when I learned Japanese, I spent years poring over kanji characters, trying to piece together how each symbol connected to the original Chinese character from which it was derived. Or when I learned to play the saxophone, I'd spend hour after hour playing scales until my body could feel the notes. Yet, what I've been most fascinated by in life is the interaction between people. I've spent most of my life working out the do's and don'ts of human relationships. This was not really a passion as such, but rather a means of survival. As a child, I lived in constant fear of my father, always wondering, when is he going to explode? And is there anything I can do to stop it? I was hyper-focused on not doing anything to trigger him. It was nearly impossible. Little did I know that it was completely beyond my control. He was bipolar, a chemical imbalance for which he could sometimes take medication, other times not. When on medication, after a few months of relative calm, he'd say, "The pills make me feel dead inside." He'd stop taking them, and then another period of rampage would begin. I would joke to myself, when he's no longer feeling dead inside, everyone else around him is. At any moment of any day with no provocation, I could be the object of his animosity. He screamed at me with such venom that it made no sense to me. He had no concept of or empathy for what he was doing to my mental state. As he often said, "The world revolves around me. Get used to it." I was held hostage by his mood swings. Luckily, when I was 10 years old, my parents divorced. It was a relief. After years of yelling at each other, I was happy they separated. It meant I would spend most of the time with my mother and have an escape from my father's unpredictable wrath. It was only as an adult that I fully realized how much those years imprinted and shaped me. The impact of being raised in constant fear, especially from a person who was supposed to protect me, is not easy to translate into words. It's more of an unconscious state of readiness, a constant buzzing brain that does not rest. Explaining this hyper-awareness to someone who has not experienced it themselves is virtually impossible. It's not logical, it's beyond words. What I learned much later is that children of an abusive parent like myself develop survival skills that translate into a high capacity for empathy. Many readers of damaged parents may ask the same questions as I have. How can I hear the slightest nuance of judgment in a person's voice? How can I see someone's state of mind in a split second? How can I hear a single word and sense a person's pain point? For most of us, this sensitivity is not a consciously developed skill, but rather something that is developed subconsciously in order to survive. Throughout my life, this has been viewed as a talent by others, even a magical ability by some. But at the heart of it is a little boy who tuned his entire body into a tuning fork to survive, noticing micro expressions on faces and subtle shifts in vocal patterns, seeing subtle movements or a shift in the eyes. I share this because this is not a typical how-to book with a logical step-by-step formula. The insights, principles, and tools that I share in this book came to me experientially, and it was only as an adult that I could reverse engineer them to make logical sense. My invitation to you is to meet me in this experiential space and feel into the deeper knowing beyond logic. This book is for beginners and experts alike. Everyone will get something out of it. I'd like to think that after you put this book down, you'll have the feeling that you've got augmented reality glasses which give you a new ability to see and understand things that were once abstract ideas. To create this understanding, I've broken the book into 6 sections. Section 1, the essential conditions for connection. Section 2, connection killers. Section 3, opening the door to connection. Section 4, creating context for deepening connection. Section 5, advanced skills for deepening connection. And finally, Section 6, navigating tricky connections. Each section builds on the next, just like when I was learning algebra in high school and needed to put things into the simplest form to understand them. I've done the same in this book for communications. I've taken the seemingly abstract world of communications and created a guide map to deal with whatever the world throws at you. An important part of this book are the exercises that come at the end of each chapter. These exercises are there to support your reflection and your integration of the topics in the book. Your best insights will come from applying the concepts by using the exercises. Even if you feel the urge to read quickly, I strongly suggest that you leave time for the lessons, or at least come back to them later. Deep and fulfilling relationships are about finding heart connections. I'll balance the formulas that I've developed over the years with the stories that make them come to life. Although structures may make it easier to understand, it also pushes us back into our heads. Although that might be helpful to some degree, ultimately, head knowledge without heart understanding can actually lead to greater disconnection between people. And this is precisely the purpose of this book, to help you create more connection between you and your loved ones, the people you work and associate with, and really anyone you interact with. I believe human connection is what we all want most. We all yearn to be seen, accepted, and loved. We all need to feel like we belong. We all want more cooperation, peace, and harmony in our closest relationships. All these core human needs are found in that space of connection we all seek. The challenge is that there are virtually limitless ways we humans separate from one another. We focus on and magnify our differences. We refuse to listen to each other. We get hurt and put up emotional barriers and close off from others. We take things personally and misinterpret others. We project our own issues onto others so that we can't see them for who they really are. We can be incredibly selfish. The even deeper challenge is that we often don't see these mechanisms that create disconnection and disharmony. In fact, we'll often defend, justify, and rationalize them. He deserved it. I'm just giving her the same thing that she's giving me. My parents made me this way. If we can't see how we create barriers between us and others, we have no way of dealing with those barriers. Seeing and eliminating these barriers cannot come from a logical formula or process. They can only come from seeing ourselves clearly, our self-sabotaging patterns, the sources of our emotional triggers, our deepest needs and wants. It is not an outside-in process where we learn specific tools and behaviors that'll hopefully translate into greater consciousness and ultimately long-term behavioral change. Rather, it's an inside-out process where we see ourselves more clearly, and that raised consciousness then naturally creates the behavior that lead to deeper connection with others. Love, compassion, and connection do not come from developed skills. Rather, they are a natural state when we remove the barriers that prevent us from living in that state. The quest to find them is not like climbing a mountain of accomplishment, but rather coming home to who we always have been. I thank you for spending the next hours together with me.